Okay, tonight, we're opening a door that many would prefer to keep shut. A discarded cooler left on the side of a New York highway carried not food, not ice, but silence. An unbearable silence wrapped around the small body of a child. 4 years old, unnamed, unclaimed. A secret left to rot in the summer heat. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories not just with facts but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. Here, we explore the fractured edges of humanity, the places where innocence collides with brutality, and the mind of the perpetrator becomes a labyrinth of fear, shame, and power. Tonight, we revisit the haunting cold case of Baby Hope, a child whose name was forgotten, but whose mystery refuses to disappear. The story of Baby Hope begins not with her life, but with her absence. She was discovered in death before anyone could recognize her in life. That absence became her identity, and for decades, investigators and the public could only cling to a name they invented: Baby Hope. The nickname carried a cruel paradox. She was called Baby because she never grew into anything more, and Hope because investigators still longed for justice. She was transformed into a symbol, her individuality erased by neglect and silence. The image of a nameless 4-year-old became an emblem of both innocence and tragedy. The question that haunted New York was brutally simple. Who was this child? In the early days, no one could answer. Without identification, there was no family stepping forward, no missing person report to connect her to the world, and no mourners to give her context. To understand a crime of this nature, we must start with context. Children do not vanish into coolers by chance. Behind every such act lies a network of fractures, family dysfunction, social neglect, and hidden violence. The killer does not appear in isolation. The killer is always shaped by an environment that allows silence to grow unchecked. Baby Hope was born into a world already shrouded in secrecy. Her biological family, Mexican immigrants surviving on the margins of New York City, carried the weight of poverty and undocumented status. Fear of deportation shadowed their lives, creating a culture of silence. What was meant as protection against outside forces became a weapon turned inward. Her parents were estranged, their relationship eroded by instability and hardship. The mother, overwhelmed and unable to cope, entrusted her children to relatives. What should have been an act of trust became a fatal miscalculation. Responsibility shifted to hands unprepared to guard life, and tragedy followed. In that fractured household, authority blurred and boundaries dissolved. Children were left vulnerable to exploitation, while accountability dissolved into secrecy. Sociologists observe that violence against children thrives where families are fragmented, where shame replaces openness, and where fear suppresses truth. Baby Hope's world carried all these traits. Eventually, investigators discovered the betrayal came not from a stranger, but from kin. A cousin, Conrado Juarez, would later confess to the crime. Yet for decades his name was hidden. The family maintained silence, sealing off the truth and suffocating justice. This was not only one man's crime, but a collective refusal to speak. Juarez himself lived on society's margins. He drifted between unstable jobs and housing, described as volatile, awkward, and emotionally detached. These traits were not excuses, but signs of instability. They were the cracks through which violence seeped. He was neither remarkable nor monstrous in appearance, which made the crime even more chilling. Psychologists speak of the cycle of trauma. Many abusers carry scars of their own: neglect, shame, or violence endured in silence. Juarez seemed to embody this cycle, carrying unresolved rage and humiliation that festered until it erupted against the most defenseless target: a 4-year-old child incapable of resistance. Baby Hope's life existed at the intersection of vulnerabilities. She was undocumented, female, and completely dependent on unstable adults. Criminologists call these intersecting conditions risk factors. Each factor magnifies the danger. Combined, they leave almost no defense. For Baby Hope, the odds of survival were weighted heavily against her. One of the most haunting aspects was how easily she disappeared. No one reported her missing. No one alerted the police. Her absence raised no alarms. She vanished into the void, and silence filled the space where urgency should have been. Society failed to notice because her family chose not to speak. This silence reflected fear, but also complicity. Later, family members admitted they suspected something, but did nothing. Fear of deportation, fear of shame, and a desperate wish that ignoring the truth might erase it, kept them quiet. But silence does not erase. Silence corrodes. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that despair is not screaming but being unable to speak. For Baby Hope's family, silence was despair made permanent. Their fear outweighed responsibility, and truth was buried deeper than her body. The betrayal was layered, not just by the killer but by every adult who chose silence over action. Juarez's eventual confession illustrated this intersection of pathology and secrecy. He admitted to assaulting and killing the child before hiding her body in a cooler, aided by a relative. The act itself was brutal, but the cover-up was colder still, calculated, deliberate, collective. Juarez was not a mastermind. He was ordinary, almost invisible. That ordinariness is what terrifies most. It suggests that evil does not require dramatic villains. Sometimes it emerges from the banal, from the everyday man whose conscience collapses. Hannah Arendt once called this the banality of evil. Juarez embodied it. The cooler was left in a forgotten corner of the city, as though erasing the body could erase the crime. But memory resists erasure. The image of a child discarded like refuse became a haunting scar on the city's conscience, reminding everyone that even nameless victims demand remembrance. Baby Hope became a symbol because her identity was erased. Yet even nameless, she carried immense weight, exposing the city's failures. To notice, to protect, to confront violence hidden in families. Investigators profiled not strangers, but kin. Secrecy, control, and silence pointed inward. The truth matched the pattern. Her killer was not a shadowy outsider, but someone shielded by blood ties and complicity. Her story shows that crimes like this are never random. They are the outcome of poverty, fractured families, and silence. Baby Hope's tragedy was not only personal, but structural, a haunting reminder of what happens when fear speaks louder than truth. Her story is not only about a child lost, it is about the fragility of human bonds, about the silence that protects the guilty while condemning the innocent. Understanding her background forces us to confront not only the killer's mind, but the society that allowed him the space to act. The timeline of Baby Hope's death is fragmented, pieced together from partial confessions, faded memories, and the relentless persistence of investigators. It resembles a puzzle with missing fragments, never fully whole, yet sufficient to reveal a chilling image of violence, secrecy, and betrayal. The summer of 1991 in New York City was, by outward appearances, ordinary. The air was thick with humidity. Children played in crowded parks and families sought relief in cramped apartments. Amid this backdrop of routine urban life, a 4-year-old girl vanished quietly from view. Last seen in the care of relatives, she was already living in displacement. Her parents estranged, her stability fractured, her vulnerability magnified. What followed occurred behind closed doors. According to the confession given decades later, her cousin Conrado Juarez acted in a moment of cruelty, assaulting and then strangling the child inside an apartment. The act itself was swift, but its reverberations stretched across generations. Forensic psychology notes that such crimes rarely happen in public. They thrive in private spaces, where secrecy shields the perpetrator and the intimacy of family silences suspicion. After the killing, Juarez did not act in isolation. A female relative assisted in concealing the crime. Together, they placed the child's body in a portable cooler, arranging her among soda cans and discarded food. What was intended as a tool of concealment also carried symbolic weight. It reduced her humanity, transforming a living child into something to be stored, hidden, forgotten. The cooler, heavy with its secret, was abandoned days later along the Henry Hudson Parkway in Upper Manhattan. Cars sped by, engines roaring, while the small container rested in silence by the roadside. It blended easily into the debris of the city, one more discarded object in a metropolis accustomed to overlooking what it cannot face. On July 23, 1991, a group of highway workers in Upper Manhattan stumbled upon a discarded cooler along the Henry Hudson Parkway. Expecting trash, they pried it open and instead found a nightmare. Inside lay the decomposing body of a young girl, bound and violated. The oppressive summer heat had hastened decay, erasing the features that might have given her a name. What remained was not identity, but the stark evidence of violence. For police, the discovery was doubly haunting, not just a homicide, but a mystery without context. No missing child fit her description. No anguished parents came forward. In those first hours, investigators were left searching not only for a killer, but for the girl's place in the world, her name, her family, her story. The autopsy determined strangulation as the cause of death, with signs of sexual assault confirming a crime of both brutality and exploitation. But decomposition left forensic science with limits. Facts could be stated, but no trail to the perpetrator emerged. The silence surrounding her disappearance proved stronger than the evidence. In the days that followed, investigators canvassed neighborhoods, distributed composite sketches, and checked national databases. Each lead dissolved into nothing. She lingered as a ghost in the city, the cooler itself becoming a grim emblem on front pages and nightly broadcasts. Time worked against the case. Memories faded, urgency waned, and with no identification, investigators could not map a family tree or probe social circles. Without a name, motive, and context, remained sealed away. The city, unwilling to let her vanish completely, gave her one baby hope. The name carried both tenderness and desperation. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor. Police officers, moved by the child's anonymity, pooled their own money to bury her in a small casket. Strangers wept at her funeral, offering her the dignity her family denied. For while the public grieved, her kin remained silent. Their absence at her burial felt like a second death. Compassion came from outsiders, concealment from within. The cooler had been abandoned, but the silence endured, stretching years, shaping the timeline as much as the crime itself. Years passed, and the case of Baby Hope drifted into the shadows of unsolved crimes. With no name and no leads, investigators were left to speculate. Some believed she was the child of undocumented immigrants who feared deportation. Others imagined she was abandoned by drug-addicted parents or lost to trafficking networks. Each theory was possible, yet none touched the truth. The void invited endless conjecture, and with every passing year, the mystery deepened. For more than 2 decades, the silence held. Then in 2013, persistence, not technology, shifted the course. Detectives, unwilling to let the case die, returned to old leads and pressed again on the cracks of family silence. At last, the wall broke. Conrado Juarez, a cousin of the victim, confessed. His words mirrored the original evidence: the assault, the strangulation, the concealment in the cooler, and the abandonment of her body with the help of his sister. The confession was devastating but clarifying. For the first time, the nameless child had both a killer and a name. She was Angelica Ramirez, 4 years old. For 22 years, she had existed only as Baby Hope, a symbol carved from absence. When her name was restored, the tragedy transformed from abstract mystery into personal betrayal. She was not a ghost, but a daughter, a sister, a niece, someone deliberately erased by those bound to protect her. The reconstructed timeline was brutally simple. A child entrusted to relatives in the summer of 1991 was murdered in their care, hidden inside a cooler, abandoned beside a highway and buried by strangers while her family stood silent. For 22 years, that silence became her second coffin. Yet clarity did not soften the horror. If anything, it sharpened it. The betrayal by kin, the absence of mourning from family, the decades of denial, all added layers of cruelty beyond the original act. The cooler, the roadside, the anonymous funeral, these became the markers of her life's chronology. More than a sequence of events, the Baby Hope timeline became a testament that violence thrives in silence and only relentless persistence can drag the truth into light. When investigators discovered the cooler in July 1991, they were confronted not only by a homicide, but by an unsettling void. The crime scene revealed unmistakable violence, yet the absence of identity rendered every investigative step uncertain. Without a name, even the most basic elements of the case were destabilized. Detectives began with the body itself. Autopsy results provided fragments, age, approximate weight, and cause of death. She was a young Hispanic girl, malnourished and subjected to assault. These findings offered parameters but no direction. In homicide investigations, knowing the victim is often the key to finding the killer. Here, that key was missing. Officers canvassed neighborhoods, distributed sketches and contacted schools, hospitals and social workers. No one reported a missing child matching her description. The absence of a missing persons report was more haunting than the crime itself. It meant her disappearance had been swallowed by silence rather than met with alarm. This silence quickly became the defining feature of the investigation. For the police, it created dead ends. For the public, it deepened outrage. Newspapers called her the child no one claimed. The phrase carried sorrow and accusation, turning the case into a mirror reflecting societal neglect. The media played a critical role in shaping the case's public identity. By naming her Baby Hope, reporters gave the victim a symbolic presence. Without a name, she risked fading into anonymity. The nickname preserved her memory, offering both empathy and necessity. Yet media attention also fueled distortion. Speculation multiplied as theories spread across headlines. Some suggested she was the child of undocumented immigrants, abandoned out of fear. Others imagined trafficking, ritualistic violence, or stranger abduction. Each hypothesis reflected cultural anxieties about vulnerability, immigration, and crime, rather than evidence. For investigators, this public storm generated immense pressure. Police departments must balance transparency with caution, yet here the absence of answers made restraint impossible. Every passing year without progress transformed the case into a symbol of failure. The NYPD faced both frustration and public scrutiny as the mystery endured. The stagnation revealed systemic flaws. Evidence was mishandled, leads pursued inconsistently, and the lack of a centralized missing persons database prevented cross-referencing. Each lapse deepened the sense that Baby Hope was not only a victim of familial betrayal, but also of institutional neglect. Public reaction oscillated between empathy and anger. Vigils were held, donations covered funeral costs, and strangers left flowers on her grave, adopting her into a collective grief. Simultaneously, editorials criticized the police for failing to deliver answers, demanding accountability for investigative inertia. This dual response, compassion paired with outrage, illustrates the psychology of collective mourning. When society cannot protect a child, it seeks redemption through ritual, turning the victim into a symbol. Yet symbols demand resolution, and each year without justice transformed mourning into frustration, hope into bitterness. For investigators, the case became a haunting burden. Detectives carried her photograph in their files for decades. Some admitted that her namelessness followed them into retirement, a reminder of professional limits. The unsolved case became both a personal wound and a professional failure. The persistence of the investigation reflects a deeper truth. Some crimes do not fade. They linger because they reveal something unbearable about society. A city that prides itself on resilience had to confront its vulnerability. A child could vanish in plain sight, unnoticed by those who should have cared. Philosophically, the investigation highlights the tension between truth and time. Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote that time discovers truth, yet in practice, time also buries it. Memories fade, witnesses forget, evidence deteriorates. Only persistence, not the passage of time alone, uncovers what silence seeks to conceal. Detectives who refused to let the case die embodied this persistence. They revisited leads, re-interviewed witnesses, and ensured the name Baby Hope did not dissolve into anonymity. Their determination reflected not just professional duty, but a psychological need to give identity to the dead. Public fascination endured for similar reasons. The image of a nameless child resonated across cultures and faiths. In Christianity, an unrecognized child evokes abandonment and divine justice. In Buddhism, her suffering embodied impermanence and fragility. Secular society saw her as a symbol of institutional failure. Over time, investigative methods improved. DNA databases expanded. Yet the breakthrough in 2013 was not primarily technological. It was the result of persistence. Detectives revisited the family, applied renewed pressure, and finally uncovered the truth. The girl's name was Angelica, and her killer was her cousin. The revelation shocked the public. For over 20 years, strangers mourned her in anonymity. Discovering that her family had known of the crime yet kept it hidden felt like a second betrayal. Public anger shifted from an unknown killer to the relatives who prioritized secrecy over justice, amplifying the tragedy and deepening the sense of violation. Crimes within families are interpreted differently than those by strangers. They violate the fundamental expectation of protection. Juarez's act, combined with familial complicity, carried psychological weight heavier than a random attack. The confession reframed the story. Angelica Ramirez was no longer Baby Hope, a nameless symbol. She was a child with parents, siblings, and a family who abandoned her memory. Her imposed anonymity deepened the tragedy. The case illustrates how true crime reflects societal vulnerabilities: children exposed, families fractured, institutions failing. Justice delayed is not justice denied, but it is diminished. By the time her killer was identified, decades had passed, and full accountability was unattainable. Still, closure matters. Naming Angelica lifted a burden for detectives, transformed a symbol into a person for the public, and reaffirmed the importance of persistence. Justice may falter, but silence does not prevail if determination refuses to yield. Ultimately, the investigation was a dialogue between silence and persistence, secrecy and exposure. Public reaction, shaped by empathy and outrage, ensured the case endured. Baby Hope's grave remained visited, her story retold, until truth forced its way into the light. Memory itself became an act of justice, an insistence that even the smallest life matters, even when institutions fail. Understanding the Baby Hope case goes beyond the facts of the crime. While the act itself was brutal, the psychological dimensions reveal far darker undercurrents. Conrado Juarez's confession frames his violence as impulsive, influenced by intoxication, shame, and fear. Yet these explanations fail to account for the calculated cruelty of his actions. Alcohol may lower inhibitions, but it cannot manufacture malevolence where none exists. What surfaces instead is a portrait of a man whose capacity for empathy had been deeply compromised long before that summer in 1991. His violence was not born solely of opportunity, but of unresolved personal trauma, distorted coping mechanisms, and the corrosive effects of silence within his family. By examining his psyche, we see how human vulnerability, unaddressed shame, and emotional detachment can converge to produce acts of profound harm, revealing the unsettling ways private suffering can manifest in public tragedy. Psychologists studying child homicide often identify recurring themes: control, power, and projection. For offenders, children can become vessels onto which suppressed rage and unresolved shame are projected. Juarez's inability to confront his own failures manifested as domination over Angelica, the most vulnerable figure in his orbit. She became a stage for his inner collapse. Conrado Juarez's unremarkable exterior concealed a profound darkness. He was neither a notorious criminal nor a public threat, moving unnoticed through neighborhoods, working and blending into the city's fabric. This ordinariness reflects Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, showing that acts of extreme cruelty can emerge from seemingly ordinary individuals, whispering rather than roaring. Philosophically, his crime represents a rupture in the natural and moral order. Across traditions, Confucianism, Christianity, Buddhism, children are regarded as sacred trusts, entrusted to adults for protection. To harm a child is to transgress not only personal ethics, but the broader moral fabric of society. Juarez's act transcended mere violence. It was a profound betrayal of innocence, a moral sacrilege that violated the trust placed in him, leaving reverberations that extended far beyond the immediate crime, touching the collective conscience of family, community, and society. Trauma psychology suggests Juarez may have carried unresolved wounds from instability or early abuse. While not an excuse, it illustrates how cycles of trauma perpetuate violence. Unprocessed pain transforms into inflicted pain, echoing across generations until someone breaks the silence. In this case, the silence was reinforced by family complicity. His sister helped conceal the body, and other relatives maintained secrets for decades. Fear of exposure outweighed loyalty to truth, binding them to the killer in complicity. Shame, more than guilt, defined this silence. Guilt targets actions. Shame targets identity. To confront the crime would have meant confronting who they were as a family. Denial became easier than acknowledgement, yet it prolonged suffering, both for justice and society. The public's adoption of the name Baby Hope offered a counterpoint. Where family imposed silence, strangers created voice. Vigils, media attention, and persistent investigations ensured Angelica's memory survived. This contrast highlights a duality in human psychology: concealment through fear versus remembrance through compassion. Juarez exhibited traits consistent with antisocial tendencies: lack of remorse, delayed confession, and the ability to function normally afterward. His compartmentalization allowed him to live an ordinary life while carrying knowledge of his crime, leaving Angelica's body behind. Meanwhile, the family's silence trapped them psychologically, reshaping relationships through unspoken tension and distrust. The ripple effects of this violence extended far beyond 1991. Karma, in the Buddhist sense, demonstrates that actions reverberate beyond their origin. Juarez's crime impacted investigators, communities, and strangers, showing that violence never truly ends at the scene. Modern technology, DNA profiling, genealogical databases, and missing persons systems now offers tools that were unavailable in 1991. Had these existed, Angelica might have been identified sooner. The lesson is stark. Silence thrives where persistence and technology lag. For criminologists, the case underscores the necessity of victim-centered investigation. By focusing on Angelica herself rather than speculative offenders, detectives eventually uncovered the truth. Remembering the victim is strategy, not sentimentality. Identity anchors justice even when perpetrators seek to erase it. The ethical aftermath of the Baby Hope case prompts profound reflection. Justice, even after 22 years, cannot restore Angelica's lost childhood. While Conrado Juarez's arrest offered legal closure, it could not undo the years of suffering, silence, and neglect. Yet even incomplete justice carries significance. It affirms her existence, challenges the complicity that allowed secrecy to persist, and resists the erasure imposed by silence. Naming Angelica Ramirez transformed her from a symbol back into a person, reclaiming the identity that had been denied. Beyond legalities, the case urges society to confront uncomfortable questions. Do we notice children who vanish from view? Do we challenge silence within families? Or do we assume someone else will intervene? Angelica's story highlights the dangers of collective avoidance, a risk present in every community, and underscores the moral responsibility to act, to speak, and to remember, ensuring that even the most vulnerable are seen and valued. Psychologically, the case demonstrates human response to the nameless dead. Mourning rituals, even by strangers, serve as collective therapy, transforming helplessness into remembrance and moral action. The public, by adopting Baby Hope, confronted their own anxieties about neglect, violence, and secrecy. The Baby Hope case also demonstrates how cold cases can be resurrected through persistence. Time alone does not erase crime. It often preserves it in layers of silence, secrecy, and neglect, waiting for determined investigation to uncover the truth. Persistence, stronger than shame, fear, or complicity, is what ultimately brings hidden realities to light. Beyond legal resolution, the psychological insights and societal aftermath of the case reveal that crimes do not end with confessions or convictions. They linger in collective memory, influencing communities, shaping perceptions of justice, and exposing systemic failures. For Angelica Ramirez, the aftermath transcends the punishment of her killer. It reflects society's decision to remember, to recognize her humanity, and to honor her existence. In doing so, her life, though tragically cut short, is affirmed, resisting the erasure that decades of silence had sought to impose. The tragedy of baby Hope lingers not only in the cruelty of her death, but in the decades of silence that followed. Her story is more than a crime. It is a mirror reflecting the fragility of childhood and the darkness that can grow when compassion is absent. If fear is truly a mirror, then this case asks us, will we dare to look into it and confront what we find staring back? Justice may eventually arrive, but it always asks for vigilance, memory, and the courage to refuse forgetting. These stories remind us that silence can be complicit and that every unanswered question leaves a mark on society itself. If this episode moved you, remember to like, share the video, and subscribe for more. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Newton, M. 2006. The Encyclopedia of Unsolved Crimes. Infobase. 2. Schechter, H. 2003. True Crime, An American Anthology. Library of America. 3. Jenkins, P. 1994. Using Murder, The Social Construction of Serial Homicide. Routledge.